And we are live, guys. Welcome to the Tripod, where we break down the NRL every game, every week from a punting perspective. I'm Jacob Wynn. I'm joined by Tristan Merlahan from Top Sport. Special edition of the Tripod. You guys weren't expecting this. This is a surprise edition. I've just asked Tristan last minute to come on because the final round of the season is always a crazy round to bet on and also to handicap from a bookie perspective. Tristan once described making these markets for round 25 as a nightmare. So, Tristan, it's also a special occasion because we don't usually chat live on the pod. You're a busy man. I'm busy too with what I try to put together, but we're here live, which is special. So I appreciate you making the time on my request to join us to talk about round 25.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jacob. Always good to have a chat. And yeah, I once described this as a nightmare, and I think this is probably the biggest nightmare in recent times in trying to put together these markets, because there's so many permutations. There's not even just the games. There's a lot of finals implications. There's markets already that have moved very hard. So we always release our prices on a Monday around lunchtime each week. And yeah, we put them up a couple of hours ago, and there has already been a few little nibbles, which we'll be able to chat about and discuss why that may have happened, why we set the line in the first place, and go through it. So I think from the NRL point of view, one of the, I suppose from a punter's and a bookmaker's perspective, that adds a lot of assistance to this round in recent times is that at least come tomorrow we'll have a squad of 21. So you do have a bit of an idea of who's going to be lining up, but obviously we don't have that just yet. The AFL last week of the season happened a couple of weekends ago, and you don't get that luxury until Thursday night. So that was another problematic one, especially with from the AFL's point of view. They weren't going to have that buy in between the final and the last round. So there was a lot of resting in that scenario too. So yeah, but very, very, very keen to chat about all these games and give you guys my thoughts and hear yours as well.
Well, you know, I must confess, I'm a fan of the AFL. I've barely followed it this year. Can you just tell us, like, because of that, was there any major line moves as a result of teams that tried to rest players because they didn't have anything to gain in the final round, which is a situation we're going to be looking at in the NRL?
Yeah, well, the AFL, I guess, this year turned out a little bit different. It's almost the exact opposite with the NRL. So the AFL is a bit different in the NRL because the top 5 teams were all live in terms of trying to make the top 4. So right. And they actually played each other where you had 1 versus 4, I think, 2v3 in that last week. So all of those games meant a lot, and everyone rolled out their full strength side. The Swannies, I think, rested Buddy Franklin because they couldn't move from their position, which, you know, you probably factored that into your thinking and thought there was a good chance of that occurring. And then there was a bit of a race for the last couple of spots. The one that did move from memory was the West Coast game, because we were pretty confident West Coast would roll out their full strength side because they were still a chance of making the 8 if results went their way, but they rested a lot of players. They put Tim Kelly and a few of those guys on ice. So that one got us by surprise. And I guess that's they're the ones that get you when you're expecting something and something else occurs. Like, at least we know, or from our point of view, we've got the guard up for the Melbourne game, for the Roosters game, and also the Raiders game, where we think there might be possibility of players being rested. So we've sort of got some sort of factoring in, but it's when something happens completely out of the ballpark that really skews those markets. So yeah, the Lions West Coast game, I think, moved 10 to 15 points, which is a pretty big move.
I was actually going to touch on some monumental line moves we can refer to, the poster child situations from just last year in 2020, which was a shortened season, but round 20, I'm sure you remember it all too well. Just to be clear, guys, this is not going to be a round 25 preview. We're not going to speculate too much on who's going to win the match or how the match is going to unfold. I do my full deep dive once I do see those 1 to 17s and, you know, acknowledge the reserves on Tuesday night. And obviously that's still going to be out Wednesday night. I'm going to do a round 25 preview, but I'm very conscious of the fact that some of these lines might be different by Wednesday to what they are today. That's part of the reason for this pod, to talk about what is basically factored in to your guys' thinking to create these lines with so much uncertainty. Because if the punters can understand what assumptions have been made, then they can decide whether they want to actually jump in prior to the teams being listed, especially if they've got a different opinion. But last year, this was a huge opportunity for punters. It actually happened in two different games. One was the Dragons Storm, where the Storm had nothing to gain in the final game of the season. And I think they'd already sewn up they couldn't win the minor prem, or if they could, it would only have been if like Penrith was to lose to the Dogs. So Melbourne was happy to wave the white flag, played basically a B team other than maybe one or two guys. And Craig Bellamy announced it on the radio the morning of Teamless Tuesday. That line crunched in from Dragons plus 16.5 to Dragons minus 2.5 on game day. The other one, which was even more surprising, I believe Ricky Stewart decided he wasn't even going to try and give his team a shot to make the 4. I believe the Raiders had an outside shot at the 4. He said, we'll just take our bye week this week. He played a B team against the Sharks, and I think we had a situation where Cronulla was about a 10.5 point underdog all the way into a 5.5 point favourite. We're talking 16-point line moves. What do you remember about that final round of the season last year?
Yeah, well, those are the exact two games that you referenced that were the big moves. The Storm one, as you said, Belliat gave us not us, but gave them the marketplace the word early in the piece. So there was a lot of bets rolling through, but I guess there was always, we had our guard up there, and when that news broke, there was an influx of bets. So we reacted very hard to that. I think we might have suspended the market temporarily and reassessed it. But it's difficult then to know where to replace the market. And that's a difficulty because just because they're resting all these players, and it doesn't mean they're not going out there to win the game. And in some respects, from a punter's point of view, and that's where you say the differing of opinion is important, and to weigh up your own sort of opinion on what these changes are going to do, because sometimes those guys vying for that 17th or 16th spot in a squad might put in a bigger effort than someone that's just trying to get through the game and not hurt themselves in the lead into finals. So it's a difficult one to assess. That Raiders Sharkies game was the one that got us completely from left field, because there was actually a push for the Raiders early in the piece before this news broke, because I think there was maybe even talk the Sharkies might have been doing something similar where they may have been resting players, and that was probably the one that caught us completely off guard, and that's why there was such a big move, because never in our wildest dreams did we think that Ricky would wave the white flag and give up that top 4 spot. And I think that's the tricky one to weigh up this year, particularly with the Storm Sharks game. Obviously, we know the Sharks need to win. If they win this game, they make the top 8. So they're going to be absolutely doing everything they can to win. They'll be naming their full-strength side. We got no doubt about that. I think going into this round, or going into Friday of last week, the mentality was that the Storm would rest a lot of players. That was where everyone's sort of head was at. However, does that change now on the back of Parramatta knocking off the Storm on the weekend? Does that mean that the Storm are willing to give up this game, or willing to put out field a weakened side? Because if Penrith win, then Penrith will retain the minor premiership or get the minor premiership. However, is it maybe beneficial to finish second as opposed to first with the way the two teams are shaping up? Would you rather play the Rabbits in week 1 as opposed to Manly? You know, there's all these things which everyone's going to have different opinions. Obviously, we're not going out there saying either side are not wanting to win this game, but that's all going to get factored into the decision. Once we get to tomorrow, and as you say, as Jimmy sort of pointed out there in the comments, like there's a 100K prize up for grabs as well for finishing the minor premiership, as well as obviously the prestige of doing that, and they have been the best side over the course of the year. So there's a lot of questions to be raised, and I don't know the answers to them yet. We're in that middle ground between the Storm resting players or not, in terms of where we've set this line, which we'll touch on as we get to. But it's a tricky game. I'm sure the Storm wouldn't want to be going into week 1 of the finals on the back of 2 losses on the trot as well. So that gets factored into it. And the other tricky thing with the Storm is they've had a lot of guys coming back. I think it was clear to see that Pappenhausen wasn't 100% fit there. Or need a match practice, should I say. So there's a lot of guys that haven't been playing a lot of football. Is it beneficial to give them a rest at this point in time as well? So there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's what is making this week a very, very tricky one to price.
And on top of that, it's that overarching question. It's the benefits, pros and cons, but it's what's that greater benefit, rest, or are you risking having a rusty team going into the finals? There's a school of thought that you want to be playing your best footy. You want to keep building combinations. When we get to a team like Newcastle, they have absolutely nothing to gain from a ladder perspective coming into this round. But there's an argument that they haven't had their first choice spine for many weeks. So why would you want to break up that chemistry? The Knights have won 5 in a row, for example. But on the other hand, it's a war of attrition, the NRL. There's an energy level. You're spending petrol every single game that you play. There's obviously any game can have a collision that can be a head knock that can result in a player missing weeks, or judiciary, plus whether it be just minor knocks where your players, everybody's got their little niggles, obviously. You're only going to add to that with every game you play. But also the risk of a major injury. Imagine if, refer to Newcastle again, they come out and play because we want to build up our combinations, and Kalen Ponga strains a groin or something in a game that you had nothing to gain from. So I'm a believer that if you can rest, you should, and the Storm did that last year, won the comp, and I've seen other teams like the Roosters be pretty smart about that. So I think that's why I'm definitely pinpointing, and I did share a multi last night, which I think the odds have already massively down significantly, purely just betting against teams that I thought would be smart or would be prudent for them to rest guys. I just want to make it also clear, guys, like how do you set a line? And you can add to this, Tristan, but on a regular week, you guys set a line with you've got your set of in-house power ratings. You rate how good every team is. The line that you set for a game, the handicap, is just the difference between those teams. Now, of course, you add a few extra factors. You're going to add a home field advantage, if there is one. This is an unusual year, or a lot of neutral games. You're going to adjust for players in and out. You're going to obviously adjust each week for form. You may even adjust for if there's going to be a hailstorm, you're going to reduce the line or whatever it may be, right? But what's difficult about this round is you don't know which players are in or out, but you've still got to come up with a line. So that's where it all comes down to now. We're going to try and guess who's in or out. That's going to be a big part of what we're going to talk about game by game. So shall we jump into it? Shall we jump in starting with a really interesting one, Raiders-Roosters?
Yeah, definitely. So we've come up with we came up with a line of 3.5 when we opened at lunchtime today. There's already been a push for the Raiders into 2.5, so that game has moved a point. Obviously, 2.5, 3.5 is not a huge difference, but there has been support. So the things we know about this game is that the Raiders need to win to give themselves any chance of making the 8. So they're 50-odd points behind the Sharks in terms of for and against. So really they're banking on the fact that the Sharks lose to give themselves a chance of making it. The Roosters are banged up. They are sitting in 6th, and the reality is they're probably unlikely to change from that position on the ladder. They would need Parramatta. Oh, should I say this might be an important factor because the Eels play the Panthers, and who are bigger underdogs, and then the Seagulls look very likely to win against the Cowboys. So they are a chance of getting into that 5th spot. They also have a lot of players that are carrying injuries. So how many players can they rest? They haven't got a massive depth in their squad to be able to bring in people from outside because there's so many people on that injury list. So I don't feel they can take out too many players. They might pull out 2 or 3 players or 4 players. So the way we've factored this market in, that we feel the Roosters are going to be reasonably close to full strength, because I think everyone would consider there would be a benefit in the Roosters claiming 5th spot, and even in the unlikely scenario that the Seagulls do rest a lot of players, jumping back into 4th, because you would probably assume that playing either the Sharks, Raiders or the Titans is going to be a much better result for them than playing the Knights in that week 1 of the playoffs. And the fact that there's also a lot of players that are missing, it's very difficult for them to rest a whole myriad of players. So it's a tricky one. I'm sure they would have loved to have caused an upset last week and put themselves in a different position, but that wasn't to be. So Raiders, obviously, we know there's no doubt they're going to be playing full strength. We know they're going to be absolutely 110% trying to win. So, but looking at that market, I think if there was any doubt that the Roosters were going to rest someone like a Teddy or a couple of those real key players or a Sam Walker, the Raiders would probably be favourites in this game. So by looking at that market, we've assumed that the Roosters are going to play as close to a full strength side. The Raiders are definitely going to play a full strength side. So it's just if you, from a betting proposition before the teams come out, if you've got any consideration that any of those stars, particularly Teddy, may get rested for the Roosters, then the Raiders will absolutely shorten significantly on the back of that.
You've made a few good points there. One overarching point is how many players can these teams actually rest? I asked you, you can tell me what your best read on it is. My understanding is they're all in the bubble. They're all got their top 30 contracted players. So you're thinking, all right, you've got 30 to choose from. But then, of course, you've got suspensions, you've got injuries, and even the Roosters have had retirements and stuff like that. So how many healthy bodies has Trent Robinson actually got to pick from this weekend? You know, we know there was even more carnage last week when they played the Bunnies. So then it's like, even if the Roosters, let's say they don't value this game, they're happy to finish as low as 6, they'd rather get the rest. I don't think they physically could play 17 reserve graders. So I think the most they could probably rest would be like 4 or 5 key players. You made the other good point that there is potentially something to gain for the Roosters. You know, I was originally looking at it like there's no difference between finishing 5th or 6th, but the fact that the Knights have sort of elevated out of that logjam pack where they probably are the consensus next best team outside the big 6, and the fact that I think the Knights will rest this weekend and be fresh in the finals. You're saying if the Roosters win this game, they can dodge the Knights potentially. Let's assume that it's most likely the Eels will lose and then the Eels would fall back to 6th. So that actually does give some reasons why the Roosters might play, but I don't think those pros outweigh the cons, the risk of you know, spending more energy. And this, if any club in the NRL needed a rest, I would say it's the Roosters. So I find that fascinating. I should mention this line was 4.5 yesterday. I think you guys have opened your markets today, but some of your competitors opened 4.5. And I do think the Roosters would be smart to rest every key player they can. I think they'd be crazy to play Teddy, crazy to play Sam Walker. The only ones maybe is like, I think Crichton's back from suspension, guys who maybe could do with a run. So if, as you said then, if the Roosters actually do rest more players than you guys are speculating they will, the Raiders could start favourites on Thursday night.
Absolutely, and that's the whole purpose of this chat today is for us to give our thought process, you to give your thought process. It's not about who we think is going to win or lose the game at the moment, but it's where we perceive the market is set. So I can guarantee you right now that if Teddy and or a Walker or one of those stars, if they don't play, the Raiders start favourites, and there's absolutely no doubt about that in my mind. And that's the thing. That's the decision punters have to make. If you like the Raiders, which I still think they're a good bet, even with those players in, or a decent chance with those players in, with so much to play for, are they going to drift immensely if Teddy's named? I don't think so. I think if those players get named, this market still probably sits around where it's sort of sitting at, and as a result, you know, you've sort of got a little bit of a bet to nothing if you take the Raiders now, if a Teddy did get rested. But we're certainly factoring in that we feel the vast majority of the Rooster players will be playing for all of the points we've listed just recently.
Yeah, I reckon if I had to bet, I'm saying that the Raiders will be a starting favourite in that game, and I'm glad I gave them out, I think, like $2.40 to win last night in a multi that I did share for the followers. Let's move to the next game then. Another really interesting one to talk about. You guys have got the Sharkies as an 8-point underdog and $2.80 to win head-to-head. I saw as high as 8.5 last night, and some places with the Sharks at the low $3 head-to-head mark. So it hasn't changed a lot. And again, this one is purely how you price this is a guessing game. Would I be right in suggesting if you knew for sure the Storm was going to play a full-strength side, we're looking at a line of 20 plus?
Yep.
And if we knew for sure the Storm was going to rest as many players as possible, and you go back to Munster made a comment in the media that they were looking to rest 10 plus, could the Sharks actually start slight favourites in this game? That's the kind of extremes we're talking about. So talk us through how you landed on this number.
Yeah, so this one we've sort of picked a spot in the middle, and where we've got doubt either way. I feel there might be probably the difference with the Storm is, as we touched on, they lost. Do they want to give up that minor premiership? Do they want to take on the Seagulls? All those things are hypothetical, and you know, I certainly can't answer that. But I think the key thing is they have missed a lot of players over the course of the season. They will want to get miles in their legs, I guess. But you probably think there's scope for a Munster or these sort of players to step out. Now, the difference is we've seen them missing players. I know there's been so much talk about the Roosters and about the Panthers missing players all year. The Storm have got so many guys that can fit into that spot. and they're still competitive. Like that, if they rest Pappenhausen, even though I think he definitely needs a run, but if they were to rest Jerome Hughes, then maybe Hines comes into to half or something like that. They've got some very able replacements, and that's the thing you've got to consider as well. So this is by far and away the trickiest one. If the Storm come out and they say, look, we want to guarantee ourselves this minor premiership and we play all of our players, this game gets close to 20. If they rest a heap of these key players, then there's a chance the Sharks could potentially start favourite, because not only that, you've got to understand the mechanics of how the markets move. If the Storm rest a lot of players, then the perception is that they're half giving up the game, and the Sharks have so much to play for, then the market will push that option so far. So you've got to now be looking at the news. You've got to be listening to all of these different things. You've got to be weighing up in your own mind, because this is the game. If you can sort of feel you're going to beat the market in terms of knowing what you feel a team lists are going to look like, then this is the game to bet into, because this game is going to be the one that moves by far and away the most. Because I would suggest the way we've priced this game, that we're probably factoring in 3, 4, 5 players don't play. I feel that's probably the number. We're certainly not factoring in they're going to rest the vast majority of the side. They're going to rest a number of key players, but we feel there's enough adequate cover to come in and still give them a very competitive chance of beating the Sharks. Obviously, we know the Sharks are going to be at full strength as well. So they're the decisions that we're factored in. But this is the game out of all of the games we've got absolute no certainty and no confidence in where we've set this market.
Now, first thing I'll say is winning the minor premiership, and Maddie put in the comments, or Jimmy there, that you win $100,000, and they talk about maybe they used to give that to the players for their Mad Monday or their Bali trip or whatever, and if that's motivation. But there's motivation itself to win the minor premiership. It's a great achievement. It's who's on top of the ladder after a full grueling season. And the Panthers had a chance to rest players in the final round last year. They said they didn't. They said they value that, and they admire the record of who's won the last few minor premierships. Feels like it's been either the Storm or the Roosters the last few years, and those are, dynasty teams. And so Melbourne values the minor premiership. But what do we know for sure? We've heard comments that are pretty telling. I mean, Brandon Smith said you can't wear the minor premiership round on your finger, and he said that the number one goal is winning that grand final, which of course will be back-to-back grand final wins. And the truth is, people remember grand final winners, but people don't remember. You can't tell me off the top of your head like who was the 2012 minor prems or 2013 or whatever, but people can very readily remember the premiers. So there's so much more stock put into winning the competition. Therefore, Craig Bellamy said himself, and this was after losing to the Eels, he said, we will do what we think is best to set us up for week 1 of the finals, because that's that all-important top 4 clash. And you make a great point too. We've thought for weeks it would be against Manly. Now we don't know. It could easily be against Souths. But either way, the Storm want to be primed for that one. And therefore, they don't want any unnecessary injuries and they want to be fresh. But you're right as well. We've seen that they can still perform really well with a few key players out. And you've got guys like Pappenhausen, Hines, even Harry Grant, and a few of the forwards as well that have not played complete seasons. Therefore, you can argue they could actually be well served to get, another run in the legs. And of course, there could be something to said for bringing form in, that if the Storm mail this game in, that would be going into the finals off back-to-back losses. So there's a psychology aspect to it as well. So it's a lot to think about. I take Bellamy at his word that he will rest multiple players. So I don't think this line is going to go up. I'll say that much. I think when they name the sides tomorrow, I think this line could be about right if it's a kind of a medium strength Storm team. But I would be wary that if the Storm just say, look, there's also like almost that reward the guys who've been in the bubble and training hard every week but haven't been able to play because the reserve competition hasn't been running. That's what they did last year. They gave everybody a game, and then you were going to see guys like Cooper Johns in there and guys that we haven't even seen. I think Lume just got his first start last weekend, but we're going to see plenty of these new names and fresh faces in the Storm side. And even then, you wouldn't totally write them off. If you are in the Storm's top 30, you're probably a pretty good player. We see some of the guys that leave that club that are still really quality players, just can't crack the roster. So, that would be my prediction, that this line is either going to stay about where it is if you guys are right with that sort of, say, 4 Storm players out. And if it's more than that, that line goes south and we could have a situation. And it's like Dragons were favoured against the Storm last year. The Dragons came like 14th last year. this is a Cronulla side that is 8th that has to win to get in. So that's the other part of the equation, that the Sharks are not easy beats. So it's a fascinating one for sure, and people can make their assessment based on, I think you bet on this game based on how much you guess the Storm values it. Because I think the Storm can decide how much they're going to win this game by, or if they're going to win, if they choose to, depending on how strong a roster they play. Any other thoughts if you got, share it on Sharks Storm, Tristan? Otherwise, I'll move to Eels Panthers.
I think you summed that up pretty well.
Okay, mate. So this one here is an interesting one because it will be impacted by what happens a couple of hours earlier. Although I suppose like the Penrith can't prepare for this game. They're not going to know whether or not like what's going to be at stake, because if the Storm has won 2 hours earlier, or if the Storm has won minutes before this one kicks off, then Penrith can't win the minor premiership, and then Penrith would be in a situation where I don't know, they may seesaw with Souths, but essentially they'd be locked into the 2-3 game. So Penrith could have nothing to gain from this. Parramatta has an outside shot of finishing 4th, but I think it's very unrealistic. I think the fact that Manly controls their destiny and has a very winnable match and they're over 20-point favourites, I do think the Roosters and Eels will assume that Manly will get the win. So I think it's not worth trying to burn your players out just for a possibility that's probably going to get taken away from you later in the weekend. So this is an interesting factor then, that we could have a game where neither team really has much to gain and they could both rest a bunch of players. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, and I think the way this market is positioned, we saw what the line was the last week with with the Storm against the Eels, where I think it got to 24 or 26 or something like that at jump time. And the way Penrith's playing, you would probably feel, and the way the premiership's moved, that if Penrith were full strength and the Eels were full strength, then maybe that line's up near 20. Although we know that the Eels are much improved on the back of that performance too. So that's obviously factored into it somehow. There was a lot of discussion earlier in the week or last week that Parramatta were going to use this game to rest a lot of players, which certainly the market hasn't factored that in. The Panthers, on the other hand, like they looked a little bit clunky at times against the Tigers. They've had a lot of players out, so you probably feel there might be merit in them giving their players a run. But we know that if Cleary doesn't play, then they're no chance of winning the comp, or very minimal chance of winning the comp. So there's all these questions to factor in. By the look of that market, it would appear as though we have factored in that the Panthers may rest a couple and the Eels may play at full strength by that number. Now, the line was at 10.5. It's moved to 12.5, which to me, that's probably a sign that maybe both of these sides, because as you say, that there's so many things that we can't answer at this stage. The Panthers have got that more than an outside chance. They'll know the rumours that the Storm may not be playing all their players. It depends, as you touched on. They really valued that minor premiership last year. Do they want to try to do the same? The loss to, if they happen to drop to 3rd, I don't think it makes a lot of difference at the moment, being there's no home ground advantage. So if you finish 2nd or 3rd, it's irrelevant, really. The Eels, though, I think, are they going to want to burn that momentum after that huge win? They probably realise they're no chance of finishing 4th, but are they going to want to try to go into the finals after their horrific last month of saying, well, we've actually won a couple of games here in a row, build that momentum into a likely matchup against the Sharks or the Raiders with a bit of confidence? So to me, I'm starting to feel as though both of these sides may name reasonably close to full strength sides, which is completely different to what I thought this time last week. So I think the market is heading towards that direction. The fact that it's gone 10.5 out to 12.5. And if both sides name full strength, then I think Penrith probably move a little bit more towards the minus. I think it might get to 14, 16.5. If they sit a couple of those players, maybe a Kikau or these sort of guys that have played a lot and been covering a lot of the bulk, particularly over Origin, that'd be probably the guys that I'll be looking at from a Panthers point of view that had to cover that load over Origin that might get a rest, and Kikau's one that comes to mind. So yeah, this game's fascinating. It's tricky because there could be a lot to play for both sides, and it could be nothing. But yeah, at the moment the market would position that both of these sides are going to be reasonably full strength, with Penrith maybe without one or two.
My prediction will actually be a bit contrary to what you said there. I don't think Parramatta will believe we need to add to the momentum. I actually think beating the Storm's the perfect level of momentum and confidence. And now it's like, all right, boys, you've earned a rest. you've got the confidence back. We know what we can do. Like Mitchell Moses, no way. Gutherson, no way. You know, we've already lost Reed Marnie. Campbell Gillard is out. I think we rest Paulo. I think we rest all our key players. I definitely expect Parramatta's pretty much a second team to play in this one. But the question for me is
just
how.
Interject you there, mate. Like, just the only thing I would touch on, and I agree with all of that. This is a local derby. That's the only thing that we have to consider into that equation, which I should have touched on as well. Are they going to want to rest players?
That's fair enough. Although, albeit like it's a Western Sydney derby that's not going to be played, in Western Sydney. I don't know. Like even I think we saw last year, the Roosters mailed in that final game of the season against Souths, even though that's the oldest and most bitter rivalry of all, because Robinson was much more concerned about playing the next week and having a shot to beat Penrith. So that's the way I see it. I will predict a very understrength Parramatta team. I also think Penrith is probably wise to rest a few key players. It's really complicated because maybe, if they could nab the minor premiership, that's a carrot there. So maybe I don't know about this, but could they have a plan A and a plan B and they actually see how that game unfolds just before? And I guess they have to name their team an hour before kickoff. So they literally have to name the team at halftime. So I think Penrith has to decide how much they value this game in advance. The safer option for Penrith is probably to rest a few guys. So my guess is they both play quite under strength. And then I still think Penrith will win because I think Penrith has more depth than Parramatta. Have the final word on that game if you like, and I'll bring up the odds. Otherwise, if you want to talk about another one with big rest implications, Broncos Knights.
Well, just on that, just to close off on the Panthers game, I take all of your points. And if Moses and Gutho sit that game, then that game gets a lot higher than 12.5 because, if to me that market's factored in as if both sides are pretty much full strength. If Penrith
but what if they both end up under strength? So you got no Moses, no Gutho, but you got no Cleary, no Luai, no Coruscant or whatever.
Yeah, and
then it could come full circle and it could be around this.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. If both sides rest equal players, then it definitely can be. So that's where you've got to make your own assessment now, because that game's another one where I sort of touched on the Storm game was the biggest mover. If this game has potential with everything you've just outlined there to be another huge one, because I think that's priced in at 2 or 3 miss from both sides. So it'll be an interesting one, and definitely keep an eye on those team lists or factor in or feel free to have a whack at if you've got a very confident opinion on one way or the other who's getting rested, because that one will move a bit as well.
And maybe I'll even just give a shout out to something I love, correlated multi. I think Storm losing is correlated to Panthers winning because it gives them so much more to play for. So I think if you're going to bet on Cronulla, you could multi that into a Panthers head-to-head. I don't know if you like hearing me talk about that kind of way to get an edge over the bookie, Tristan. We'll move on to Brisbane against the Knights, and played in Brisbane. So this is the first game where we played in front of actual home fans, which we always have to factor in, is a little edge to Brisbane, who've come a little bit alive in the last few weeks, even though they fell a bit short against Cronulla. They were in the game there. And the line you've got is Brisbane +2. I saw this line as high as 4.5. I think even this morning you could still get 4.5 at some of your competitors on Brisbane. And I thought that was clearly too high. I tipped Brisbane head-to-head in the multi that I shared last night as well. Main reason being the Knights are going to finish 7th. They're not going to finish lower. They're not going to finish higher. In addition to that, the Knights have some injury-susceptible players. We've seen what a difference this side is with or without Ponga, with or without Pearce. Brayley's put in a lot of work this season but needed a rest the other day. Now, there's a counter-argument that we touched on at the start that they're gelling. They've won 5 in a row. I don't think that matters a great deal. I think you can still keep gelling on the training paddock, and you can have a great 14-day preparation to really create a great season after the Knights were underwhelming for the first 3 or 4 months of this year. Here they are. They're going to be in the finals, and they're going to have a chance to beat. I'm predicting it'll be Parramatta or a depleted Roosters. The Knights can beat that side and get themselves into the second week of the finals and be relatively fresh. I'm surprised that Brisbane is still an underdog. So what thinking went into this line?
Yeah, well, the line was 4 flat when we opened it. It's now in at 2 flat short of the plus. So definitely big money, the Broncos, in line with everything you've just touched on there. I think the assumption is a lot of the Knights players are going to miss for all the points you just outlined. I think that's quite clear. We saw these two teams played a month or so ago, and the line was up near, I can't remember, 18 or 20 or something in that vicinity. So if the Knights fielded a full strength side, it would be a lot closer to that. So the assumption is that the Broncos are going to be reasonably full strength. I guess that's the thing. Like, are any of those players who are leaving, or are they going to make any changes at that regard? That's
Brisbane.
probably the Brisbane.
They'll have those two suspensions, so Piacora and Flegler will be out. But I think they'll want to end the season on a high. So I think Brisbane will pick the strongest side they can. Of course, acknowledging what you've said, like, I think, definitely the Knights were about a double-digit favourite when these sides hooked up about 5 weeks ago. The first thing you're acknowledging is there already is a big disparity between these teams. So then you take out a few key Knights players, and you're asking the question: Does that make Brisbane necessarily better than the Knights? And that's a fair question to ask. But I think that even if you lose a bunch of key players for the Knights, it also signals the intent by the coach that we don't really care that much if we win or lose this game. I just have that feeling Kevy will have his boys fired up. So again, I guess you guys, to price the Knights as a favourite, you must only think they're going to rest probably a handful of guys.
Yeah, and probably the key players. I'll be very surprised if you see Pearce and Ponga and those key players you touched on. So yeah, and it's these are the impossible games to price because you just don't know, and obviously the fact that the Broncos have been still pretty ordinary for the vast majority of the season, so it's a tricky one to actually know. Like, even the clear assumption is that they are going to be resting players the Knights, and that's why we've got this game a lot closer than what it is. But if they rest 5 or 6, and maybe like there's probably scope that the Broncos start favourites here. As you say, it's a clear indication from the coach if they go down that route. But as I touched on as well, some of those guys that might be on that precipice of making a spot or making a final, they might be really wanting to aim up and put their best foot forward as well. So it's a very tricky one to price. These are the real hard ones when you think you have a good idea on what you think might happen in terms of resting, but it's still trying to find that number. And we just still have the Knights slight favourites even without those players, just on the back of the other bit piece players doing their bit. But the Broncos have been much improved, as you're saying, Kevy. We'll have them fired up.
Yeah, I think that is a fair point. Like, okay, we're assuming that because Brisbane's been playing with good heart recently, that they should carry that in. But they are an inconsistent team that also could just lay an egg. Whereas the Knights, it's obviously like a confident squad. Everyone's buzzing. Everyone's training hard. There's guys who are fringe in the team who, want to put their best foot forward and be in the 17 for those finals games. And also, it's a nothing to lose factor. It's like, yeah, all right, we're resting a few of the big boys, but let's show what we can do and let's throw caution to the wind. So there are a lot of reasons why the team, just because they name a much understrength side, nobody goes out trying to lose. So I'm definitely not saying that teams are trying to lose because they don't name their best side. Kind of the point you're making there is that the players that are left behind, some of them are still some pretty good players and they could still get a result. But my prediction will be Brisbane will start favourites when this one's kicking off on Saturday. Let's move to next one. Another interesting one too. In North Queensland, playing the Seagulls up in Townsville. And I've seen this line already move a bit. Now, you guys have Manly $1.07 to win, minus 22.5. I saw this line open as high as minus 28.5 last night. The motivation is clear. Manly wins and they secure top 4, which is quite remarkable considering they didn't win a game in the first month of the year. And I think that there's no reason Manly could lose this game. I guess we've seen some crazy results like the Parramatta one, but the fact that there's so much on the line for Manly, I don't think they can afford to rest players or rest many because they really do need to make sure they secure this result. How did you price this one up?
Yeah, so we priced it up at 26.5, the market open, and we were completely of that attitude that they were going to put everything to the on the line and win the game because they lock up their 4th place finish if they do win. And even now, like on the back of the Storm losing to the Eels, like you feel like they give themselves a chance at knocking off the Storm. They were close there 2 or 3 weeks ago, so they definitely have everything to play for here. The Cowboys, we've seen when they get under a little bit of adversity, their defence goes missing. And whilst obviously a lot of these guys are playing for contracts and these sort of things, and for next year they will be trying hard, there's just such a big gap between the sides. So I've been quite surprised by the betting move. It's moved 4 points in the favour of the Cowboys. So the market is suggesting that whether that's a player out, I don't think so. I think if it was a key player out, it probably moves a lot further than that. I guess it's just opinion that maybe after watching the Sea Eagles against the Doggies, maybe people weren't as impressed as what they have been. And the reality is if they're 20 points up with 20 minutes to go, maybe Turbo or DCE get a rest as well. So there's those things you need to take into consideration. But we've certainly priced this game up that it's going to be full strength for both sides, and that 26-point gap seemed about fair. It's into 22.5. My opinion probably hasn't changed too much. I still think the Sea Eagles play everyone to make sure they lock up that 4 spot.
Yeah, I agree with that. One thing people should understand, they're fighting for the 4, but points differential is irrelevant. Theirs is going to be superior, so they literally just need the 2 points. And I've heard people kind of make that point that the Sea Eagles need to win, but they don't need to win by much. So there's a school of thought that they'll just want to get in front and control the game and slow the game down and not risk too much and could just kind of strangle the Cowboys out of this one, have no motivation to extend margin. I think you hit the nail on the head there that their dream scenario would be to get up comfortably and take Turbo off for the final half hour. I mean, you could try and get clever and say DCE or Turbo have a rest this week, and then you'll be like absolutely fighting fit and we come in, we need to beat the Storm. But you're playing with fire there that if you sit out a key player in this one and you get upset and suddenly you're in the bottom 4 and it's so much harder to win the comp. So I don't think this line will move too much. I have the opinion that it is really important for Manly to win. The fact that they were clunky last week, if anything, may serve as motivation that, hey, we need to get a bit sharper this week. We are playing our starting 17 and we want to put in a good performance here before the finals. And then just by virtue of that, when Manly's on, they can run up big scores on teams. And of course, Cowboys actually got a win last week and looked a bit better. But with the inconsistent teams, you can't guarantee that effort's going to return. Another interesting one as well, or one that involves rest again, speculated rest, and another one that's seen a huge line move. Again, I gave this in the multi last night. I said jump on the Dragons plus 23.5. You can let us know what you opened the Dragons at. We're now on your odds, and I think this is within a point of the rest of the market as well. South Sydney is a minus 12-point favourite, $1.30 to win. The equation for South Sydney, I can't see them having anything to gain. I don't think that they can't, because they can't make up the points differential on the Storm. So there's no scenario where they can win the minor prem. They're going to be in the 2-3 matchup no matter what happens. I mean, I just thought of this then. If the Storm regardless of whoever falls to second, that's their fate. They're going to be in the 2-3 matchup. So South Sydney can't control their destiny at all. Therefore, I think there's a lot of reasons why Souths will rest a lot of key men this weekend.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And maybe in years gone by, to finish second had an advantage over finishing third. If the Storm did happen to drop to second and the Rabbitohs could have overtaken them, then obviously, even though that's not possible with a differential, but you would obviously rather playing that game at home as opposed to the neutral venue this year. It doesn't matter. Playing Penrith, if you finish second or third, doesn't matter. It's the same outcome. So I can't see any scenario in the world where the stars for the Rabbitohs line up. They haven't had as many of the injury issues as those other big teams, so I think they probably are due for a rest. I was very surprised to see the line open up where it did. We opened the line a little bit shorter than the market, where we opened at 20.5 when it was 22.5 out there. We were wanting to be on the low side of the move, and we didn't avoid it. We still got whacked on the way in. We're into 12 flat. We're still at the bottom. So my consensus is this game gets a lot lower. If you think the Dragons and I know everyone on the in the Tripod family have been cheering against the Dragons all year. I think everyone's got to acknowledge that they've been pretty gutsy in their effort. They've had a lot of things go against them. They were favourites to run last this season, and they were 2 games away from making the 8, and obviously they had a barbecue disruption. So they've actually put in most weeks. I think they've got a lot of young kids there that are really going to want to impress, because I think they're probably a team on the up for next year. So they're really going to want to put a big effort in. I think Souths have a massive chance of resting the vast majority of their side. I can't see any chance that this game jumps in double figures. I just see it's going to get lower. We obviously can't open up too big a gap on the market in terms of where we price this game. But yeah, I think this game starts single figures at the absolute highest, and I'll be very surprised if any of the big names line up for South, because they're going to put all their eggs into the basket, knowing now they're without Latrell going forward as well. They can't afford another injury or their season's done.
Over 20-point handicap last night really was a gift, and one of the reasons why punters do love round 25. There are plenty of edges to find, and I'm in agreement with you. Like, we're both sitting here talking, there's nothing to gain for the Rabbitohs by playing their stars. Therefore, they should have a host of changes, and therefore, why are the Dragons still 12-point underdogs? And I think it's going to go down as well. You talk about that Dragons barbecue. That was about a $250,000 barbecue from your guys' perspective. Maybe if that doesn't occur and they don't get all those suspensions, then they easily could have jagged one or two more wins, and they could have been in a position where this could have been a game that was handed to them on a silver platter to make the 8. But alas, they fell short. They're not going to trouble anybody in the finals. But I actually agree that they've got some positive energy. They're starting all the kids now, and they're actually playing a little bit of enterprising footy. Scored, over 20 against the Roosters, scored 26 on the weekend against the Cowboys. And we're in agreement that if you like the Dragons, it's not too late to probably jump on. You're still going to get a line or a head-to-head. I mean, I saw a head-to-head last night on Sportsbet, $9 on the Dragons. I almost thought I should have been telling people to take that, but I went a bit safer and took the plus 23.5. So we're in agreement there that nothing to gain from the Rabbitohs, and I would only play the Dragons, or else I'd wait. What else have we got? All right, last couple of games, there's no rest implication, so we can go really quickly, but there's a motivation factor here with the Gold Coast Titans playing the Warriors, and you've got the Gold Coast minus 11.5. The only thing I've been hearing from our forum is a lot of people liking the Warriors because they're seeing the Titans as essentially a dead team that's still laying over 10 points. Do you, I guess they'll both play as strong a side as they can. There's no rest factor here. But do you think if the Raiders and the Sharks were to lose and the Titans could actually make the 8 by winning this game, then you would increase this line?
Oh, absolutely. So that's why there's no way in the world the Titans are 12-point favourites against the Warriors if this game's it's just a normal game during the season. Like I was quite confident on the Warriors actually to make the 8 3 weeks ago. I thought they had 3 winnable games where they actually got pipped in the first 2 against the Broncos and then against the Raiders there on the weekend. And I thought that this game was potentially going to be close to pick 'em at that point. So the fact that the Titans are $1.26 is not right. But what that is basically the market, again, reading into the fact that there is a chance that the Storm knock off the Sharks, and which I don't think, a good chance. And there's also a chance that the Roosters knock off the Raiders. And then the Titans then would need to win this game by around, like, if the Storm name all their players and the line starts around about that 12 mark, then the Titans only need to win by 12 if the Storm perform to expectations. Now, this game's going to move significantly one way or the other based on the results of those 2 games, and even on the team list. If the Storm leave a lot of players out of their side and that line drops in less than 8 and the Sharks are much more likely to win, then I think the motivation drops off for the Titans. I really do. I think that's when the plus comes into play. If the Titans are still live going into this game and the Warriors aren't, then that line definitely goes up, even just due to market perception that the Titans are going to be chasing a score then. It doesn't mean they're a 16, 18, 20-point better side, but if they're up by 12 points and they need to win by 20, they're going to be trying to chase that down. They're going to know exactly what they're playing for. So this game isn't going to move much on team lists, I don't think, unless there's a huge change from expectation on the Storm or the Roosters side. But if you've got an opinion on this, if you really like either the Sharks or the Raiders this weekend, then the Warriors at the plus is a good play now, because this game will start a lot shorter if one of those sides gets a result, because all of a sudden that motivation drops out for the Titans, and it's probably a good overs bet, because it'll just be free flowing footy all the way around.
That's a really good observation there. The Titans points differential 23 or 24 worse than the Sharks, and they need the Sharks to lose. They also need the Raiders to lose, and then do the Titans need the Raiders to lose? I think they do. Yes, they do, because
2 points in front of them. Yeah, so
as we speak, the Roosters and Storm are both favourites, so it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility. Roosters and Storm do get wins, although I'm saying I wouldn't be backing those sides right now, and I think they could be resting. But if that happens, the Titans will know exactly how many points they need to win by. And even there's a scenario where the Storm beats the Sharks by 24, and then the Titans simply have an equation: we just need to win to get in. And then you don't really factor in how much margin they need for your line, but you're still factoring they're fully motivated because they've just been handed a lifeline. But I find that really interesting that you're saying if either of those results happens, a Raiders or a Sharks win, that it eliminates the Titans, that this line goes down to single digits.
Yeah, absolutely.
It still becomes a very unpredictable game, though. We both agree the Titans are the stronger side, and maybe they play better without pressure. I would actually caution people who are thinking that plus 11 is a great bet, that even if the Titans have nothing to play for, they somehow could kind of take their frustrations out on the Warriors and they could still win big. So that line isn't jumping out to me as value, and I agree with you as well. It's not going to be a significant mover based on team lists. It is in the hands of basically what happens Thursday and Friday night. And finally, Tigers Bulldogs. Neither with anything to gain. I don't know if West can get to 9th and keep that streak going or not, but can't make the 8. And shout out to Matheos, who tipped Tigers to get over 7.5 wins, which is one of my favourite season bets, but also missed the 8. And you guys gave that out at a generous $5.50. So it's kind of a middle there that they have hit because they've got 8 wins, but they won't make the 8. So a few people in the pod got on that. Yeah, I don't even know. Have you got a comment on this game? With they'll both name the strongest side they can, and it's going to be nothing special really to watch either.
No, it'll be just both sides playing for pride. It would have been a nervous watch for the season multi if this game was the one that was going to decide it. Obviously, 7.5 wins, so they've covered that, so that's out of the equation now too. So no, this game is. I can't see anything. There's certainly not going to be resting players. There'll be players playing for contract. And yeah, it's just one of those ones. And
maybe a feel good story for that documentary. In all seriousness, that's teams are looking for things to draw on for motivation. But yeah, it's a very unknown as well. But the line right now is just reflecting the fact that the Tigers are still a stronger side than the Bulldogs, but we've seen this side inconsistent as well, so it's hard to really know what they're going to dish up. I'll talk more about that once I deep dive on Wednesday. Thanks heaps for joining me, Tristan.
Both sides go about as well as my hair does, so
that's funny. Aaron's comment down the bottom. And Tristan's getting complimented on his hair, which means he must be live with me, and I'm making Tristan's hair look good. They've asked what shampoo you use. I won't even need shampoo, especially after the last 3 weeks. I tell you, dropping out fast as anything, but I'll still give my best shot on Wednesday. But I think this was a really valuable podcast to share for the followers. I appreciate it. I'm sure a lot of other people did, because we're talking about some very significant line moves. I feel a lot of the lines that we've discussed today won't be the lines on Wednesday. And of course, guys, this is just our speculation on where those lines will go. It's no guarantee. Even though Tristan is the director of the place that's going to be setting these lines, we can only speculate based on where what we think is going to happen tomorrow. And of course, in between now and tomorrow, more rumors can come out as well, which can move a line too. So that's where Tristan gives the advice: keep your ear to the ground, and you may hear something before it gets reflected in the marketplace. It's about knowing which teams you want to target, and then trying to get on at the best possible line or price that you can. So thanks very much, Tristan. You'll join me again on Wednesday to actually let us know where more of the money does fly. Actually, I did have one more question if you got time. You mentioned that you guys have copped a bit of a hit, you did cop a hit on the Dragons game. Can you just quickly talk to me about your limits again? Because you guys do try and limit your risk with lower limits earlier in the week, and then what they increase to later in the week and by kickoff. Yeah,
so we don't bet anywhere near as big early in the week as what we do at game time, which every bookmaker is the same. I guess the difference with us, and we've touched on many times, particularly earlier in the outset. I know you got a lot of early listeners since when we got involved, but
your traders are listening to this. Sorry to interrupt you. Broncos line dropping. I'm telling you.
Potentially some punters listening to your pearls of wisdom and giving us the hit. So it could be one of two ways. We always get blamed for that, but it can go both ways. So, but yeah, with the way the limits work. Like we bet everyone. Like when some of the other operators, if you're a sharp punter and you're trying to have a bet on a Monday, Tuesday, you literally can't get a cent on. And that's I'm not trying to bag anyone else on. It's not my go. But we bet everyone to win 500 or 1,000 at least early in the piece. And then we move the market. What we probably do though is if we're taking a $500 or $1,000 bet on a Monday or Tuesday, we're going to react a lot harder than if we're taking that bet on a Friday or on game day. So we are moving the markets harder. And as I said, we were trying to avoid those bets on the Dragons, and we couldn't get out of the road. So we haven't got a terrible position. We've been hit multiple times, which I would have liked to have avoided, because what you end up doing is you open up holes where if we've laid them at 20.5 or 18.5, and then you start laying the minus once it gets into a number where people are happy to commit to, you can find yourself in some real ugly sort of books. So the limits aren't anywhere near as big, but if you're getting multiple people sort of hitting them on the way down, it can turn into an ugly position. Once we get to game day, we bet everyone in the country, in the world, to win at least 10,000 once the teams are out on game day. That's something, it doesn't matter if you're the sharpest punter on the universe, we bet everyone, and that we back our prices. We also, take a position in those spots, and we're willing to take some really big punters on, and that's something that we do our best with. We're not always right. We're certainly not always right, and but we understand the premise of bookmaking is if you've got a set of prices up on the board, you've got to take a bet. But also we're also respectful enough of the market to understand in this sort of situation, and we know we can explain that as well if punters blow up, that we're not going to take everyone's bet on a Monday when there's so much uncertainty. We're going to bet to our limits. We're going to keep it nice and tight, and we're going to react quite hard to those bets, because at the moment there's just so much uncertainty, and you can't have confidence in where these numbers are going to end up. So hope that makes sense to everyone listening. I hope you've enjoyed what we've had to say today. Like I think it's been very informative, and I think it's good to look at a round like this when there is so much speculation out there, just to sort of at least hear those inputs before things happen, and then don't take what your opinion is. Take that on board and say, well, hey, I disagree with what the guys have said here, or I agree with it, but I still like the opposing side. You can still utilise this information that we've passed on and have your own opinion on the game. That's the beauty of it. So hopefully everyone has a good weekend. Hopefully you can back some winners, and if you're up near the top of your tipping comps, hopefully this at least helps with that. At least when you put your tips in, you'll know what the team lists are. But you've just got to be mindful as well that even on Tuesday, they might name some players on extended benches. There still are some chances of some late swings as well. So keep an eye on that. Where you're talking about the Panthers game as well, I think they're down to 19 players left with a day to go. So they do drop down pretty quickly in that regard. But yeah, it's exciting week coming up. We'll see how we can get through it, and we'll chat to you tomorrow.
I'm actually glad you dropped in that point right at the end, that we're not going to know everything with team lists, because there's still going to be scope for 4 extra players that could switch in and out. And that's where you also get coaches playing games, ducks and drakes. And even I wonder if coaches want to play mind games against other coaches in terms of who they think they're preparing for or what other sides are doing. And you could, this could happen, I don't know, but Melbourne could name what looks like a really strong 1-17 on paper. And then in the next 3 or 4 days, 2 or 3 more stars actually withdraw and get replaced by reserves players. So that's all something to consider as well. I really appreciate you took the time to go through this with me, and you literally even shared kind of your own vulnerabilities as well, and what you're telling us, what assumptions are built in, and that there's a lot of uncertainty from your side, and the best you guys can do is make your best assumption, because you're pricing something with so many unknowns. And I think that's the fascinating part. It's so much more to being a successful punter than just knowing how a footy game is going to go. You want to be able to identify and be able to read the market. And I think that's where this pod was all about, how the market's shaping up for the weekend. So we'll see how many of our predictions we get right as well in terms of where these lines end up. But thanks again for taking the time, mate. Appreciate it, and all the support this season. We'll talk again on Wednesday.
Thanks for that. Talk tomorrow.